Hello, everyone. Great to see you all here. Thank you so much for coming to this event today. My name is Claire, and I'm the project lead for the Environment of Peace initiative at the Stockholm Institute of International Peace Research Institute. And I'm really delighted that we get a chance today to talk about some of the interconnections between climate change, environmental degradation, and peace and security. In building this report, we had about a team of 30 researchers, but we also had a fantastic panel of youth experts that really helped to bring alive some of the challenges that they're seeing in their own communities and also some of the potential solutions. And I'm really happy that 3 of them have joined us today in order to talk about those experiences. With the report really focuses on the complex and many ways in which climate change and environmental degradation are increasingly creating risks to peace and security, but also how climate action and conservation, whether mitigation, adaptation, can be forces to build peace and to address and to build more resilience within societies. So I think that kind of opportunity of climate action and the positive benefits that it can bring is really the focus of today's session. So we're going to show a quick film about the report, and then I'm going to hand over to my panel to really take over from me. We have 3 great speakers. I don't think actually they do need an introduction, but I'll introduce them anyway. Adenike, Nisreen, and Nadiah, bringing their experiences from Nigeria, from South Sudan, and also from Malaysia. So I hope you enjoy the session. I'd really like to get some kind of interaction after the panel have spoken, so please come with your suggestions, ideas, and questions.
Insecurity and conflict are on the rise. Human activity is putting the natural environment under more stress than ever before. It is an increasingly toxic mix. The number of armed conflicts around the world has doubled in just 10 years. So has the number of people displaced from their homes. Spending on arms is increasing, global hunger is growing. At the same time, environmental crises are adding new risks to security. Drought leads to failed crops, floods force people from their homes, ocean ecosystems die. The twin security and environmental crises are creating new, complex risks and compromising our prospects of achieving and maintaining peace. The result? A new era of risk. Unless we take action, the situation will only get worse. There is a way forward. It is possible to build the foundations of a new security, and it begins by acknowledging that we need to tackle the twin crises together. We must address the root causes of the environmental crisis, cutting carbon emissions quickly, reducing pollution, restoring forests, protecting nature. However, solutions meant to address environmental issues can have unintended negative impacts on peace and security. We must enable a green transition that is both just and peaceful, with policies that avoid sparking new opposition or conflicts. Governments need to switch spending from things that fuel the twin crises, such as building their armed forces and fossil fuel subsidies, to activities that restore the environment and build peace. Environmental integrity and peace are inextricably linked. By addressing them together, we ensure that measures aimed at solving one problem don't make the other worse. Ideally, they would create positive synergies. The Environment of Peace report explores options for building peace in this new era of risk based on principles of urgency, fairness, and far-sightedness. It makes recommendations that everyone can use, from the United Nations to governments, from financial institutions to civil society. The need is urgent and time is running out. Find out how we can build an environment of peace.
Thank you, everyone. We've just had a brief introduction, and now we are into the discussion proper with my fellow colleagues. And I really want to get an insight or perspective, because I believe that every country have their own side of the story to tell about the impact of the climate change crisis, how it breeds conflict, and what do you think are those things that lead to insecurity? Could it be water? Could it be lack of vegetative cover? So I just want to hear from you, starting from you.
This is just like Zoom. Everyone have to start muted, and then you say, "Oh, you are muted," and then you unmute. Yes. So basically, the main problem with climate change and how it's related to peace and security is something, and as I always say, something not new. It has been always there. It's just people decided to do the ostrich behavior and bury their heads in the sand while the rest of the body is there. Because we can see it very obvious. Normally we have the traditional way of how climate change can actually enforce conflict, whether directly or indirectly. Directly by, first of all, as you mentioned, the water scarcity, the food scarcities, and the tension that happens because of the lack of the natural resources between tribes, between people who are living, especially in the rural areas, between the nomads, because in a lot of places around this world, when climate change hit the most, some population are not staying in one place. They have different kind of lifestyle. The indigenous communities who are living in the territories. So climate change causes conflict because human beings are survivors. They need to survive, and that's how they do their best to continue surviving. The other way where climate change can actually cause conflict indirectly, which is basically through migration, whether it's internal migration or external migration. So let's say that we have a famine in place A, and then people want to move from this place to a place where there is water, crops, green cover, etc. They move, but they find what we call a host community, the community who are already living in this place. And this community is also suffering from the resources are impeding and going shorter because of the same reason, which is climate change, so a conflict can happen there. Another thing, we have borders. So before we have borders, people can actually move where there is, and everything became easier. Now we have borders, and we have to have papers and passports to cross the borders, and it's a very long story. So when they cross the border, another conflict might happen. And the new introduction of how climate change can cause conflict is directly related to fossil fuel. Now buying fossil fuel means that you are giving more money for countries to abuse this money and use it in wars, like what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, for example. So there is many ways on how climate change can actually cause a conflict, whether it's direct or not direct, or even from a fossil fuel perspective. Not mentioning the drilling processes itself in extracting the fossil fuel from the ground. It causes a lot of conflicts in many areas. So yes, I guess talking about the topic is something that is very important, but the most important is to acknowledge it on a scientific way with data that can prove, because there is a lot of denial right now happening, even within the UN, to the topic of climate change and how it's related to peace and security. And they have the worst excuse ever. They said they are worried that if we talked about climate change and its relationship to peace and security, then we are militarizing the discussion of climate change, which is, for me, even a worse excuse than the problem itself, because who wants to militarize something, they will not ask us for permission, and we know they are doing it, and they can actually put them into investigations, and they can put them naming and shaming or wherever. But it doesn't mean that we neglect the problem just because some people want to abuse it. We don't work like this.
I really love the point you mentioned, talking about the United Nations Security Council. And actually, in my address this morning, I really mentioned about the fact that we need to reform the process, because it doesn't talk about the reality of the climate change crisis in Africa. Because in Africa, it's already leading to insecurity, conflict, and even harmed conflict. And so if we could reform the process, we have an African country having a permanent seat. Resolution like that of last year, December, will not be rejected because there was a resolution that was done by Nigeria, co-sponsored by Nigeria and Ireland, and it was rejected because they'll feel like one of those people that have the veto power rejected it, and so it becomes irrelevant. But the more we acknowledge these facts, the more it becomes better for us to tackle this crisis before it leads to the fall of our democracy. Because now it keeps shifting, just like the COVID-19. It just keeps shifting and shifting. And I just want to ask you about the Darfur crisis, because it led to the loss of livelihoods of thousands of people. Maybe you could just talk about it. Maybe it was climate-related effect or just a security crisis purely.
It was 100% purely a climate change problem all over the beginning. Actually, it's million, not thousand, and they are still in the refugees camps. They are still, even after 10 years of the crisis, they are still in the refugee camps. The previous Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, said about the war in Darfur, that's the first non-climate war in the new history. And a lot of the NGOs and the civil society, the Sudanese one, actually worked on how the percentage of the rain are going down in that area, and they actually predicted a conflict 4 years before the conflict happened. And then, of course, the government interacted very wrongly and armed some groups against the other groups, and it became ethnicity problem, etc., because in Sudan, some groups and some ethnicities works on agriculture and the other work in the pastorism. So it's not actually an ethnicity problem, but they made it so. It's actually a livelihood problem. It's making their livelihood problem, because some are farmers and they want to conserve their crops and their farms, and some are the pastorers who are lacking land and lacking water for their cattle. And it simply says that, of course, what a government do can make the problem worse, or it can make the problem less. But if you do not actually talk to the root cause of the problem, more conflicts are going to happen. And this is what we are experiencing in Sudan. We have problems right now as we're speaking in the Blue Nile. We have problems now as we're speaking in South Kordofan. And all of these areas are very climate-sensitive areas, and they are suffering, and we expect a huge problem, just like the Darfur size, very soon if we did not address the climate change. And I always add that we had a peace agreement last year, 2 years actually, and it was, Sudan is a country that is full of problems, and we always have some sort of conflict, and I can name 10 different peace agreements that happened in the country. But Juba Peace Agreement was the first to address climate change and environmental degradation. They have a dedicated chapter for that in there, and I think finally some people are listening to the environmental groups in the country. Of course, it did not continue because of the military coup that happened on the 25th of October last year. Yet, at least there is an acknowledgement of the problem in the country, and maybe this is the start of this discussion.
Yeah, very well. You mentioned the loss of livelihood, which is very important, because I feel like peace is not just the absence of war, but the ability for us to sustain our livelihoods. But I'm going to come back to you with one other question. But before then, let me ask Nadiah, what is your own perspective in your own country?
Again. Hi everyone, my name is Nadiah. I'm from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I've been through, I think, for these past 2 days, I've been speaking to in 3 or 4 different panels, and every time when it comes to the word peace and human rights, everybody cowers. Everybody got so scared.
Even the Secretary General.
Everybody gets so scared at the word peace and human rights. But it's okay to talk about SDGs. It's okay to talk about ESGs, but human rights, normative framework, nah, let's just put it in a bracket. So in the work that I do, there's a really strong emphasis to look into how business and government nexus, how they work, what is their relationship within each other. Because at the moment, we see there's a lot of influencing by businesses, even at this space, you know, where we want to talk about risks, when we want to talk about peace. And at the same time, these businesses, they come in, they pour in a lot of money, but they do not have any frameworks of disclosures. How much money are these businesses are giving to governments to buy arms? How much money does this fossil fuel industries are giving countries to go to war, right? And these disclosures are not made available to the public to make informed decisions. And we know it's happening behind closed doors. So how can we talk about peace even at this space where the civil society spaces are being shrunk? We can't enter every single negotiation, you know, rooms. That there's no civil society presence. I think it's really important for us to demand greater accountability of businesses, of our governments, and restrict political funding. I think this morning I was in a panel and there was a senator from the States and he talks about political funding. This is the first time that I heard somebody speak about it in these spaces, right? So how much money is being poured into elections so that certain dictators, certain people can get into power and continuously murder the rest of the country. It's insane that we are in Egypt and the rest of the around here is a land of conflict. And here we are talking about peace and we do not know what happens outside here. This is just a bubble. So it's such a weird feeling talking about peace in COP27. I just have to say it straight.
I think peace, security really dominates the talks at COP27 because I feel like because it's happening in Africa. And just like the launch of the initiative today by the COP presidency, the first time a COP president is going to be launching an initiative in this area of climate security, peace, and which talks a lot about the fact that solving the climate change crisis, especially climate-related crisis to security, it's not about weapon or arms. You know, we need to stop that, looking at the fact that once there is any climate-related security crisis, the next thing is to deploy armed group like military to go there rather than giving those people alternative livelihoods. Because I believe that climate change, displacement, migration, it makes the people become vulnerable, especially when they don't have alternative. They become vulnerable to join harm group of people, then become perpetrators of violence in their community, thereby affecting the peace and security, national security as well. And so instead of military action or investment, just like what you mentioned, Nadiah, we could as well invest in strengthening livelihood options, more climate action, trying to protect our natural resources, because that is something that is most important. And I'm going to come back to you, Nisreen, like talking about the Nile River that I think it borders Sudan, Egypt, Ethiopia. I would really love to hear about it because I've read a lot about it. And I don't know, I'm seeing the prospect that there might be conflicts, especially the downstream, the low stream, the lack of flow of river and the rest. I really want to hear from you on the peace security issue in that aspect.
Yes. So basically, the Nile Basin countries are 11 countries. So 11 countries are also in the basin of the Nile, not only Sudan and Egypt and Ethiopia. Yet the conflict, as you are mentioning, is because Sudan and Egypt are in the downstream of the dam that Ethiopia is trying to build. So that's why only these two countries are concerned, because any other country below that are on the upstream and they are not impacted by this dam itself. Yes, thank you. I think also one of the major problems now is that in general, hydropower is not the best option as we are speaking, especially in the African continent when there's a lot of sun. Hydropower is not the best because of many reasons. And the Ethiopian dam itself is not the best project because of another reason, plus the hydro, is that the size of the dam itself. If anything happened to that dam, the whole eastern part of Sudan until the northern of Khartoum, which is the capital, will be underwater, 6 meters underwater. And it's so risky to the point that no insurance company agreed to insure that project. I'm just putting the worst case scenarios. This might never happen. This might never happen, but it is. The other thing is, until now, there is no independent environmental risk assessment for the project, which is something that every big project should have from the beginning. And for Sudan specifically, I don't know very much about the Egyptian side of the story, but for our side of the story, having a dam this size will change a lot. First of all, the area that is the dam built on is a semi-arid dry area, which means that they have certain crops, they have certain humidity percentage, they have certain species of cattle and different things they can raise, they have certain crops they can grow, they have different and certain kind of materials that they use to build their houses, which is designed for the semi-arid dry area. After the dam, it will be a wetland. So the humidity percentage will change, which means that they have to change the whole crops, they have to change the materials that they use to build the land, they need to change the irrigation system, they need to change the whole lifestyle, because now they are not living in a semi-arid dry area, they are living in a wetland. Plus, of course, it comes with a little bit of health problems, because the new carriers of new diseases are now able to live in the area because humidity and because of the temperature difference. Now it's cooler than it was before. And this is introducing new diseases to the place that the local community, not the government in the area, no one is actually ready for them. So there is a lot of challenges. I'm not saying that it's impossible to solve them. I'm just saying that before doing such a big project, the country of Sudan, the government of Sudan should be more ready to make the population of that area adapt to the new lifestyle. We are talking about adapt to climate change, but unfortunately we also have to adapt with new human-made projects. Yes, so I think this is the main problem. Coming to Egypt, I think the only information I know is that Egypt is already under water poverty because of the high population and very small percentage per capita per person. And having such a size dam will reduce the amount of water that will reach to Egypt at the end, because the Blue Nile is contributing bigger than the White Nile that comes from Lake Victoria to the Big Nile at the end. And I think this is my only information about the Egyptian side. So it is a water security problem. I think with water diplomacy, the three countries, and with science, of course, could have managed this situation better, maybe sizing down the dam size, maybe giving more guarantees to all that. So it's a win-win situation. But I mean, for me, this is not the very important part, because this dam is something that humans created and maybe shouldn't be there in the first place. But what about the crisis that will come from the nature as a response for climate change and global warming? Things that we can never calculate for, even if we have the best remote sensing, best equipments for early warning and best climate modeling. We can never be 100% true, and we cannot be 100% sure of what's coming. And I think this is what I'm worried more about. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. This makes me to remember the Colorado River. that have been shrinking in the US. Like it has the downstream, the low stream, and all of this could breed conflict if we don't address it. And looking also at the Lake Chad, which I'm passionate about, that it has shrunk by 90%. It borders Nigeria, Niger, Chad, Cameroon, and other Central African countries. And here we are trying to see how we could restore the lake and how we could bring back the livelihoods of the people. Imagine, the climate change crisis is really affecting our natural resources. And this will lead me to the next question, starting from Nadiah. What do you think will be the solution to this crisis in solving the security, peace issue, building peace across all sectors? Because climate change is not just limited to environment. It now extends to water, infrastructures, different areas of our economy.
It's really interesting that you guys ventured into water governance and dam governance. This morning I was in an Indigenous Pavilion site session. They were talking about water has a spirit. If water is polluted, the people who depends on it will be hurt. Like if the water is hurt, the people will be hurt. I think it was such a beautiful way that it was being explained to me. And as we know, water, a lot of water bodies that we have they do not have a right. Correct. There's no laws and regulations. At least in some places they do, but a lot does not have those kind of ways to see, to recognize the right of a river, for example. So coming back to your question, what are the solutions? There are no silver bullets here. I think when it comes to adaptation, it's very localized, it's very contextualized depending on where you live, the geographical areas that you live, the socioeconomic background of that particular society, the racial, I don't know, the kind of differences varying, even varying races. It totally depends on that. And therefore, I do believe if there should be a development project, for example, for example, a development project for adaptation, it's really important, and it is going to be quite a lot because we are facing a lot of these impacts, and more projects are being built up in order to adapt us to that. And many of them are not nature-based solutions, but you create, for example, more infrastructure, etc. But most of them are also happening on indigenous lands, and indigenous people are not being consulted on many of the things that is happening on their territory. And therefore, I do believe that people need to be informed. That is a human right. The participation of people is a human right. Having data, information, and consent is human right. It has to be there. All these procedural rights must be included whenever you want to start a project, a development project on any lands, not just indigenous lands. And that is what's missing, because adaptation towards the end is about addressing people's vulnerability, right? And it's beyond climate, right? So you want to address resilience, and how can you do it when the people that matters the most are not informed of what's going to happen in their future? So I think that is something that is missing in a lot of policy rationales in developing countries, where everything is all centered, adaptation is all centered to its maximizing profit of a certain vulnerable sector. But what about the people, right? So that is, I think, what needs focusing as well. Yeah.
Okay, for some of us here that don't know about the environment of peace, you could just go browse about the reports, the policy documents on the possible solutions that exist. As a young influencers that also contributed to the report. It's housed there, you could go browse about it. And also, I'm also curious to hear from you too. What are the solutions, do you think, to all of this crisis? Because we both have almost the same thing in common because we are in the Sahel region, and so we have similar stories about the clashes between the farmers, herdsmen. So what are the solutions that you think could end this insecurity, the peace issue, and the rest?
Okay, so you can of course browse about the project and the report, but you can also take a hard copy from there. If you are an old style person, there's copies there, so please be free to take some. Well, so solutions. This is very important question. But before talking about solutions, do we have enough data and information on the problem? What is the size of it? What is the root causes of it? Do we have enough analysis when it comes to how can these communities adapt and build their resilience to climate change? Not to build peace, because building peace normally happens after conflict, but to prevent the conflict from happening in the first place. I always say this, I think I said it this morning, prevention is better than cure. It is better to prevent a conflict from happening by giving the community the enough elasticity to be able to do something before the conflict happened to adapt to climate change and build their resilience instead of building the peace after the conflict happened. So investing more in research, deep dive into the community on how can we prevent the conflict, what do they need to actually build their resilience, and how can we help them technologically, financially, knowledge base, whatever, is really important. We are talking about countries, especially in the Sahel region, where they don't know their actual population. I am coming from a country where we don't know the population. The last counting for population we did was 2010, and then in 2012, South Sudan separated. So now we actually don't know about how many people we are talking about. So the very basic data that we can actually help to solve this problem, we don't have it. Secondly, we need to stop being afraid of talking about climate change, peace and security, and make silly excuses, because conflicts because of natural resources, scarcities, and because of climate change are happening. We are not forecasting something in the future. We are talking about something that's happening right now. So talking about the problem is the first step to actually solving it. But if we kept denying it, then we will be left in a very bad and hard situation. My last point will be investing in young people. And I'm saying this not as a slogan, but as something I've seen. Young people are, first of all, the farmers of the communities, the pastors of the communities, the educated personnel in the communities, and they are the one who can, the community give respect to somehow because of the work that they are doing. They are the one who try to do something and do the emergency help when a crisis happens. They are the ones who have the innovation, who know how to use the technology. So they are actually the backbone of the communities and our main entrance for any community. So by investing in young people, we are investing in solving this problem and helping these communities. And it's not happening. No one is investing in young people. No one wants to finance projects about research on climate, peace and security. And no one wants to talk about it, even National Geographic.
Yeah, thank you so very much. That was also enriching. And trying to look at different ways at which we've discussed today. I don't know if someone will like to contribute from the audience. We'll really like to hear from you. Do we have anyone?
A big part of the puzzle, which the Environment of Peace report touches on, is military spending. We spend $2.1 trillion annually on military. Just think about how much we're proposing for climate finance. Pales in comparison to how much we will willingly give to fueling conflicts, to upkeeping this version of security that we think will save us. It's not going to. We have to invest in people, as Nisreen said, if we're going to create conditions that will create peace and security. Investing in healthcare, investing in education, livelihoods. These are all things that will contribute to decreasing potential conflicts. We have to look at what we're investing in. The military is also the largest institutional consumer of fossil fuels that is not responsible for reporting their emissions. Why aren't they here at COP reporting their emissions? We won't reach 1.5 degrees if a big polluter is left out of the puzzle. We'll miss it entirely. We won't see that we're missing it. So we have to invite accountability to those contributing the most to the crisis, and we have to rethink how we're creating the conditions for our future, what we want our future to look like, and how do we transform those structures and systems to meet the needs of the most vulnerable, the most marginalized, the most impacted. I think that is part of the solution. It's accountability and it's people. It's exactly what the panelists have said. And that's what I would add.
Thank you, Kasha. Thank you very much. Nadiah?
Thank you, Kasha. No, I thank you so much for coming up with all of the numbers, which it wasn't at the top of my head, but I know there's a fraction of something and something. But you are totally correct. Like, where are they here? This is one of the biggest polluters that we have. Not a country, but as big as a country, right? They are not here. So I think it's really important that the media. This is again coming back to the role of media of doing a lot of investigation and definitely uncovering all these stories and bringing this, to the public for them to see, because apparently this kind of institution, they don't have accountability. They don't need to disclose information because it's potentially a security, for security causes. So I think what you brought up is very important.
Okay. Can you close the event? I'm handing it over to her. We are all co-hosting this event.
Yes, I am glad to come back again. Well, I think I have said everything to be said in this topic, and just to avoid doing what I hate the most and avoid doing what I criticize all of the time, which is keep talking and with no action. And one of the slogans that I like very much is just walk the talk. And in order to walk the talk, me and a group of young people from Sudan, we prepared a concept note for a project on peace and security. Would have different aspects: study, small documentary, training for the local communities in peace building, but of course in problem resolution, so they don't reach and of course climate change, so they can understand the core causes of the conflicts that might appear. And I am begging for resource for it. It's not happening now, but it will happen one day, and I promise that I will send it to all of the audience when it happens. So this is from me and a lot of volunteers in Sudan, like a commitment. Please have your own commitments on the same topic, because we really need to take action, and we really need to help populations who are suffering the most.
Thank you so very much. I think we are out of time right now. Thank you.